Good evening, welcome to This Week in Turkey. The National Defense Ministry announced that the first shipment of the Russian S-400 missile defense system hardware started earlier today in Ankara. The first batch of equipment of the S-400 missile defense system, which is procured to meet Turkey's air and missile defense need, has started to arrive at the Mürted Air Base in Ankara as of July 12, 2019, the ministry said on Twitter. Tension is mounting in the Eastern Mediterranean as the European Union warned Turkey yesterday that it would impose sanctions if it continued to drill for natural gas off the coast of Cyprus in the Mediterranean.
A second Turkish drill ship will begin drilling for oil and natural gas in the Eastern Mediterranean within a week. Turkey's Energy Minister Fatih Dönmez has said, ramping up exploration despite mounting tensions with the European Union, which has deemed Ankara's search illegal. Dönmez added that the second drilling ship, Yavuz, was currently at the port of Mersin doing final tests and taking on supplies. Last month, EU leaders warned Turkey to end its gas drilling in disputed waters or face action from the bloc, after Greece and Cyprus pressed other member states to speak out. Turkey's first drilling vessel, Fatih, has already started searching for gas and oil in waters considered part of Cyprus's exclusive economic zone by the international community. Cyprus has issued arrest warrants for Fatih's crew members, accusing the ship of breaching the republic's sovereign territory. In a statement on Wednesday, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said, as she protects its own continental shelf rights in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey will continue to defend Turkish Cypriots' rights and interests around the island, insofar as the Greek Cypriots do not involve Turkish Cypriots in the decision-making mechanisms, including the revenue sharing of hydrocarbon resources, and guarantee their rights. Last month, the EU had warned against Turkey's drilling activities, which it deems illegal, raising the threat of sanctions unless Turkish officials abandon the project. However, Ankara insists that it is drilling inside its continental shelf.
Joining us now to talk about the Eastern Mediterranean drilling crisis is Faruk Loğoğlu, who is Turkey's former ambassador to Washington, D.C. Good evening, Mr. Loğoğlu. It's good to have you again on This Week in Turkey.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thank you.
So before we start talking about the natural gas drilling crisis that's going on off the coast of Cyprus right now, let's talk about the hot issue of today, namely the arrival of the first batch of the S-400 shipments to Turkey. So the first shipment, as we've heard minutes ago, of the Russian-made S-400 air defense systems landed in the Mürted Air Base in Ankara today, formerly known as the Akıncı Air Base. There were a lot of question marks and concerns over these S-400 systems would, in fact, be delivered to Turkey, but today we've seen that this in fact has happened and put an end to these debates. But what next? How do you think the US reaction will be if these systems are installed?
Of course, what happened today with the arrival of the first batch of different components of S-400 missiles in Turkey is the beginning of a new episode, of a new phase in this complex crisis, especially in our relations with the United States. I think what Turkey has said all along, that the S-400 deal is a done deal, and that it's going to be carried out as planned, and the dates for the delivery were mentioned as the month of July, and that's exactly what's happening on the Turkish-Russian front. But then there are two other fronts of this issue. The main one, the other main one being the United States, and of course NATO. And we have heard already reactions from both of these sides. The United States, a Pentagon statement said that there was no change in their position vis-a-vis the S-400 issue and non-delivery of F-35 fighter aircraft. A spokesman for NATO also said that the development today has increased the anxiety, the trepidations of the NATO quarters. So what we can say is that with today's latest development, the crisis has entered a new phase with regard to both the United States and NATO.
Mr. Loğoğlu, let's move on to what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean now. As we've just heard, Turkey's drilling for natural gas off the coast of Cyprus right now in the east of the Mediterranean, and this has generated a large volume of negative reactions from Turkey's allies, including not only the European Union and the US, but also Russia and Egypt. And we're also informed that the EU may in fact be preparing to sanction Turkey over this. First of all, what's your evaluation of these reactions, and how do you evaluate the situation right now?
It is, again, one of those situations where Turkey, in terms of international law and other similar considerations, does enjoy legal rights, legitimate rights in the Eastern Mediterranean, as does the Turkish Cypriot side in Cyprus, that is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. But being in the right in terms of international law, which is also challenged by our opponents, is not enough apparently for Turkey. So the reactions of the European Union, of Russia and the United States and other countries in the region are all negative, and puts Turkey in a difficult position, even as it defends its legitimate rights. So we have to really look at the situation with a deeper look. I think one problem is that the situation we find ourselves in today in the Eastern Mediterranean is the consequence of the policies followed by the Turkish government in the last decade or so. And this policy, Turkish policy in the region, has really placed Turkey way behind the Greek Cypriot administration in terms of advancing its unilateral and mostly illegal interests. I'm talking about the Greek Cypriots. The reason for this is Turkey is, for example, neglected to reach agreements with countries like Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, Israel, something that it could have done over the past 10, 12 years. It could still do so by revising its policies vis-à-vis Israel, vis-à-vis Syria and Egypt and Lebanon. But we haven't done so. What we have done is reacting to these Greek Cypriot illegal unilateral moves by granting licenses for exploration of oil and gas to mostly Western companies. What we did was we signed an agreement with the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Fine, that's fine, but that's not enough. So I think, given the fact that the Greek Cypriots are recognized by the international community as the legitimate government of Cyprus, not recognized by Turkey, but by the rest of the world, and given the fact that the Turkish Republic of Cyprus is not recognized by the international community, except Turkey, which recognizes it, our arguments really fall on deaf ears. Of course, this doesn't justify or make right the reaction, especially from the European Union, of talking about sanctions against Turkey is also totally unjustified and contrary to the provisions of the treaties governing the establishment of the defunct Republic of Cyprus, governing the interests of the Turkish Cypriot people in Cyprus, and disregarding Turkey's interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. Despite all these contrary facts of life, the European Union says we are with the Greek Cypriots, we support their view, Turkey is doing the wrong thing in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we will apply sanctions. This is not good. This is not good for Turkey and EU relations. It doesn't speak well for the European Union, but let's face it, Turkey is faced with a lot of problems on many different sides. I consider the statements from Russia and the United States as being more measured, simply something that they felt they had to do because they recognized the Greek Cypriots as the government of Cyprus. But it was not, these were not biting statements from the US and from Russia. I'm talking about the US statement from the administration. The feeling in the US Congress is more different, is quite different, and more negative toward Turkey, coupled with the S-400 issue, with human rights issues, and so forth.
Mr. Loğoğlu, as you've mentioned yourself, the Cyprus issue is a very central part of this crisis that's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean right now. So how do you think these mounting tensions could impact the future of the Cyprus issue? Do you think there's a ground for negotiations?
You said the migrant issue?
The Cyprus issue.
The Cyprus issue, pardon, I didn't hear. Okay, the Cyprus issue certainly affects the whole fabric of Turkey's relations with all the countries, including Russia, the US, and the European Union. Of course, there too, I think Turkey has, and the Turkish Cypriots have shown their willingness to reach an agreement, while the Greek Cypriots have not done so. But again, the cards are stacked up against Turkey and the Turkish Cypriots because, again, for misplaced reasons, the European Union made the Greek Cypriots a member of the European Union. This was contrary to their own foundations, their own principles, because one of those principles is that the European Union does not accept any country that has border disputes with some other country as a member of the European community. And they violated this rule when they made Greece a member of the European Union, and they violated again this rule when they made the Greek Cypriots a member of the European Union. So I think Turkey is faced with an uphill fight. I think there were times when we could have defended our rights much more effectively and much more easily had we not really severed our relations with all the countries in our region surrounding the Eastern Mediterranean. So, yes, we are right. We have rights. These are legal, legitimate rights, as do the Turkish Cypriots. But we have now we have to engage in a new and robust diplomatic activity, starting by mending our relations. Okay, what I said was Turkey must begin with a robust new diplomatic effort to mend, to repair its relations, starting with the leading countries of the region surrounding the Eastern Mediterranean. This means Syria, Israel, Lebanon, and especially Egypt and Israel. because, Turkey has more to offer in terms of both the discovery and the transport of the energy resources of the Eastern Mediterranean compared to the Greek Cypriots. Turkey is still the best way to transfer these resources from the Eastern Mediterranean to Europe and to other destinations. I think Turkey should also be talking to international oil companies, not just the Turkish Petroleum Office, but American and European oil companies as well.
Finally, Mr. Loğoğlu, the EU is threatening Turkey with sanctions. Let's try to make sense of this in the context of in the context of the future of Turkey's relations with the EU. How alarming do you think is this threat, and what do you think would happen if this scenario, in fact, became a reality?
I think this is a good question, and there are two ways to answer it. The first is not much will happen in terms of the new sanctions, because the European Union itself is making sure that whatever sanctions they will ultimately apply to Turkey will not hurt European Union's interest, especially with regard to migration issues, with regard to security and so forth. So what are they talking about? They are talking about suspending high-level meetings. Okay. They are talking about stopping financial assistance to candidate countries like Turkey. They are talking about suspending the talks about air transport of goods. Okay, but in Turkey's these are not very hard radical sanctions. But given Turkey's very sensitive, very fragile economic situation, any sanctions from the European Union and probably upcoming sanctions from the United States vis-a-vis the S-400 issue, everything will hurt. Everything will hurt. So, as I said, two ways of looking at it. One, the specifics of the sanctions that the EU is talking about is not that biting, because Turkish-European relations are at a standstill anyway. But whatever little steps, whatever little sanctions, combined with other sanctions in the horizon, especially from the US, will hurt Turkey much more had Turkey been in a stronger position economically and otherwise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Loğoğlu, for your comments on the crisis going on in the Eastern Mediterranean and for joining us today.
My pleasure, always.
Today we were joined by Turkey's former ambassador to Washington, D.C., Faruk Loğoğlu, and he answered our questions on what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean with regard to Turkey's drilling activities and the European Union's reaction to it. And now we'll continue with our next news video. President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan has slammed former Deputy Prime Minister Ali Babacan over his resignation from the ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, accusing him of abandoning the common cause.
On his return on Tuesday from a two-day Southeast European Cooperation Process summit in Bosnia, President Erdoğan told reporters that he asked Ali Babacan, who is a co-founder of the AKP, about new party rumors surrounding his resignation, but that he is not thinking about it for now. Babacan met with me upon his request. He said he will resign after the June 23 rerun elections because he lost his sense of belonging to the AKP. He reasoned this over the country's economy. For us, the common cause should not be abandoned, Erdoğan said. Mr. Ali is one of the youngest people to become a minister in Turkey. There were many subjects we could not agree on. The issue of interest rates is the most important among them. I always told him about the losses caused by interest rate, he said, adding that when interest rates declined to 4.6%, inflation was around 7%. There is no such thing that people will always remain here, he said. He said he had told Babacan that the cabinet could make use of his ideas or contributions if there were any. The president also stressed that he had asked Babacan to become an advisor for the AKP. Babacan, however, refused the offer, he said. Our party has a deep-rooted infrastructure. I told this to Babacan as well. I said, it is your way, but don't forget that you do not have the right to break up the Ummah. You are doing this, and you will not reach anything by doing this. I also told him not to delay establishing a party, because there are 4 years until the next elections, Erdogan said.
A Turkish pro-government think tank, the Foundation for Political, Economic and Social Research, SETA, came under fire over the weekend after publishing a report profiling journalists working for foreign media organizations. Journalists' associations and unions in Turkey have condemned the report.
The 202-page SETA report, titled Offshoots of International Media Organizations in Turkey, purports to analyze the political and economic coverage by the Turkish services of international news organizations, including the Voice of America, BBC, Deutsche Welle, and the Russian media agency Sputnik. The authors allege that their coverage is one-sided and unfair to the Turkish government. SETA says the report, drafted by a team of 3 researchers, aims to understand how Turkey is depicted in global arena, as well as to identify the political circumstances around which the perception of those international media organizations is shaped. The report has several sections, each dedicated to the targeted media organizations. At the outset of each section, the report provides some general information on the history of those media organizations and then divides into the specifics of their coverage regarding major breaking news, such as the coup attempt in 2016 in Turkey, operations against PKK, Turkey's military incursion in Syria, and the economic downturn in Turkey. The report lists several journalists working for those media organizations based in Turkey, as well as in their respective home countries. Their social media postings, the content of their stories, and the level of their engagement on social media platforms are also included in the report. The report also includes a chart that is referred to as a network map that shows other media organizations the journalists previously worked for. Based on the chart, the report alleges that most of those journalists work for the newspapers and TV stations critical of the Turkish government, and thus are biased against the Turkish government. The report has drawn criticism from a wide range of organizations in and out of Turkey and is widely seen as a blacklisting of journalists working for international media organizations. The Journalists Union of Turkey filed a criminal complaint against SETA on Monday, which has close ties to President Erdogan's ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP. Reporters Without Borders also issued a statement condemning the report, saying the report brought the harassment of foreign media reporters to a whole new level. The report has widely been described as a memorandum in many Turkish news websites, referring to a time in Turkish political history when it was discovered that the Turkish military had drafted a report profiling journalists back in 1990s and early 2000s.
The governor of Turkey's central bank, Murat Çetinkaya, was relieved from duty this week after a presidential decree.
Murat Çetinkaya, whose 4-year term was due to run until 2020, will be replaced by his deputy Murat Uysal. A presidential decree published early on Saturday in the official gazette showed. No official reason was given for the sacking. Çetinkaya hiked the benchmark interest rate by a total of 11.25 percentage points last year to support the lira, pushing it to the current 24%. Erdogan repeatedly criticized the central bank for keeping the rates high. In a statement on Saturday, the central bank said it will continue to operate independently and that the new governor will make maintaining price stability the key goal. In his first remarks, Murat Uysal said the communications channels would be used at the highest level in line with the price and financial stability goals, the bank said, adding that Uysal would hold a news conference in the coming days. Data last week showed Turkey's consumer inflation slowed to its lowest level in a year in June, potentially paving the way for the country's first interest rate cut since last year's currency crisis. Annual inflation hit a 15-year high in October, above 25%, but later dipped and is currently running just over 15.5%. Meanwhile, this May, Turkey's current account balance posted a $151 million surplus, improving from a $6.17 billion deficit in the same month last year, the Turkish Central Bank announced. In balance of payments figures released early on Thursday, the bank said that the country's 12-month rolling deficit totaled $2.37 billion.
During a summit in Sarajevo, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan accused the European Union for failing to help Turkey take care of Syrian refugees.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said Europe has failed to help Turkey take care of Syrian refugees or to make good on accession promises to Balkan states. We forestalled many humanitarian tragedies in the Aegean Sea and prevented the irregular border crossings to Europe, but we did not see the support and humanitarian approach we expected from our European friends during this difficult process, he said at a summit in Sarajevo on Monday. The EU had paid out just 2.5 billion euros of a promised 6 billion on refugee aid, leaving Turkey alone to carry the burden, President Erdogan noticed. Recently, some short-sighted populist circles have blocked EU enlargement policy, he also said, referring to an EU decision to put off accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. Negative trends toward division and discrimination have spread across the continent and endanger not only internal peace within the EU, but the hope and potential of the Balkans region, he added.
This week, Medyascope reporters visited a popular home concert series initiated by Kadıköy-based musician Mehmet Erhan Tanman.
Led by Kadıköy-based musician Mehmet Erhan Tanman, Piano House Moda offers a new concept of home concerts for live music-loving Istanbulites. Every Saturday and Sunday, Tanman's villa hosts 50 to 60 people who gather to listen to live classical and jazz performances by young musicians while sipping on some wine or coffee. Tanman says that his home concerts started as a friends-only type of event, but quickly grew larger as it gained popularity among locals in the Moda neighborhood of Kadıköy. Entry is free of charge, but registration is required through Piano House Moda's website.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 9 p.m. Goodbye.